With that, I'm going to turn it over to our speaker for today, who's one of our officers, ChaiNa. ChaiNa is a student here at UM-Dearborn studying philosophy, correct? Psychology. I'm going to start with a P. But she is really passionate about the topic that she has chosen for today, and I'm sure it'll be really good. So, ChaiNa, take it away.
Thank you. Do you mind turning off my slides? Just that feedback on my slides.
So I'm going to go ahead and get started as we wait for our slide to start showing up. So when you hear the words, what's in a rock, it might bring up a lot of different ideas. You might think of a geode with all of its sparkles and diamonds, or you might think of a fossil, or for us Michiganders, you might think of Petoskey stones. I know I used to love collecting them, and I went all over just to collect them. But for this specific example, we're going to talk about the geological evidence for the Great Flood narrative, which oh goodness gracious, which happened as according to the book of Genesis. Okay, so before we start on the geological evidence, I want to provide a little bit of background information for the geological flood. So for instance, I want you guys to know that there are over 200 Great Flood narratives, 200 narratives throughout a diverse amount of cultures spread throughout thousands of years about a God sending a flood to wipe out all of humanity. The oldest of which you see here, transcribed on a tablet. That is the Mesopotamian myth of the Epic of Gilgamesh. It dates back all the way back to the 18th century BCE, before Common Era or before Christ, depending on how you go. In this story, the gods of the Mesopotamians decided to wipe out mankind from the earth. They did this because man was disturbing their peace, and they decided it was time to wipe them clear off. However, a god by the name of Ea, E-A, warns one man to destroy his home and build a boat for him and his family. This man's name, and I'm going to mess it up because it's Mesopotamian, is Utnapishtim. Utnapishtim builds his boat and is able to successfully live. Now, eventually, at the end of the great myth, he does become a god, which we don't really believe happened, but it's part of the myth. On the bottom, you'll see the Greek version of the Great Flood, which is a more recent version compared to 18th century BCE. But in this version, Zeus, being appalled by the wickedness of man, decided to wipe the entire earth off. And in this case, a Titan is the only reason that the world survived. And in this one, it's Deucalion and his wife survived in what they call a little Chinese chest. So those are some background information for across the cultures. Could you go to my next slide? So now I want you guys to know a little bit about what we are going to be talking about. This is going to be the Genesis Great Flood narrative. You can find this in Genesis chapter 6 through 9. It can be told as this: humanity had become so full of wickedness and evil that God decided that they had to wipe it out. There was no goodness left in the heart of man, except for one man, and this was Noah. Noah was a righteous man and did right in the eyes of the Lord. And so God commanded Noah to build an ark, and that ark was 510 feet long, 85 feet wide, and 51 feet tall. He then instructed Noah to take pairs of every animal. Noah did as he was told, and when the ark was sealed, the rain began. The rain came for 40 days and 40 nights, and eventually at the end of 150 days, the water began to recede. It did not recede completely, but it had begun to recede. Now, this is a greatly abridged version of the Great Flood narrative, and I want to admit that. So I would recommend reading it for yourself, because whether you agree with me, which is great, you should know what you're talking about and what you believe, or for if you disagree with me, if you don't believe this flood happened, you want to know what you're arguing against. I think that is going to be something that's really important for you. Now, we're going to start with the evidence. Okay. So who here knows what the highest mountain in the world is? You can shout it out. Yay! So it is Everest. Now you will see these fish fossils over on the left side of the slide. These are known as conodonts, which are related to hagfish and are jawless vertebrates. They were found at the summit of Mount Everest, one of the highest points, just a heads up. And on Mount Everest, aside from this, they have also found trilobites, ostracods, and cynoids. The trilobites are an extinct species of arthropod. This makes them related to crabs as well as insects, and they were entirely marine animals. They could not survive out on land. Ostracopods can still be found today and are tiny crustaceans. And crinoids, better known as sea lilies, are related to sea stars and urchins. They are often found attached to the sea floor or free floating. So none of these creatures could have survived on land. And that's an important information to find, because how did they get all the way to the top of a mountain? Well, the most reasonable answer would be to say that they were brought up with water. They were able to swim up there. Okay. Now, this may be the first time you're hearing about these fossils on Everest, because it's not always completely talked about, but these fossils on that side were found in 1924 by Noel Odell Descout. Now, the simplest answer for this is the water levels rose up so high that it covered the mountains. And when the water levels receded, these creatures left. However, there goes a little bit more detail for that. We are interested in the search of the truth, so we must answer how the water rose up so high, which we're going to get to. I'm going to do a brief overview, and then at the end of it, we're going to really talk in depth about the tectonic plate movement for that. Now, when the ocean started to rise, the tectonic plates for oceans, the ocean tectonic plates are a lot heavier than the continental, so they started to go underneath, releasing magma, which pushed the ocean level floor up. This caused the ocean floor to rise, which pushed the water levels up, as well as the increase in rain brought up the water levels even higher. Now, that's a very simple idea, but that information alone tells us that the water could have raised up 3,000 feet. Now, I have another question for you guys. Who here knows what the largest mountain range is, like the highest mountain range? It's okay if you don't know. Scott? Yes. Do you know how high they get? 29,000 feet. And we have found marine fossils in their heights. In like the highest point of the Himalayas, we have found marine animals that could not survive outside of the water. Yes, those specifically were cephalopods, in case you want to look it up. Now on the bottom, you may be wondering what this fossil is. These are whales found in the Andes Mountains. Yes. How do we look past the fact that we're whales? That's the part I get stuck on, but I don't know. Okay. So can we go to the next slide? So the next thing that we're going to cover is rapid burial of plants and animals, or fossil graveyards as they're called. So if we expected to see a rapid great flood, we would expect to see animals that were covered in silt and sediment quickly, with no warning for what happened. And that is exactly what we find. We would find creatures that were in the middle of eating, like the fish on the left eating another fish. We find animals giving birth, like this fossil. If the flood truly happened, we would expect to find extensive graveyards filled with these fossils. And this is exactly what we find as well. In the Grand Canyon, we find a graveyard with billions of intricately saved fossils and preserved creatures. This graveyard stretches for over 180 miles, crossing at least one state line. To cover such a vast area and create this graveyard, just realistically how it would happen is there would have to be sediment moving almost as fast, if not faster, as an average human can run. And that's like a man running specifically, because they tend to be faster than women. And it would have to be 24 cubic miles wide, which to put in perspective is huge, moving very, very quickly, what we would kind of expect if a giant wave hit, carrying sediment with it. And these graveyards can be found all over the world, not just in the Grand Canyon. I know creationists love to bring up the Grand Canyon, but really it is a true geological find.
Yeah.
Okay. And another thing you'll find is that it's not just marine animals in this sediment. You find land animals mixed in with it, as if they were also carried on top of the land. Now, some of you may have the objection about how do we know that these burials were so rapid? We're going to ignore the fact that these animals are in the middle of eating or giving birth. How do we know that happened? Well, in Australia, we find jellyfish. Now, we find fossils of jellyfish. Now, that might seem like a really kind of stretch, but jellyfish's bodies will disintegrate in the sun, as well as break apart with the waves. So if you were to hit them with a wave, they're shattered. But we find fossils that are so intricate, we can like study that type of animal. All right, we can move on to the next point. The next point we're going to go on to are polystrate trees. Does anybody know what that is?
No.
Okay. So a polystrate tree is a tree. I'm going to go over here so I can point out a little bit more of what you're seeing. A polystrate tree is a tree that goes through several layers of the geological column. So as you can see, you see how there are different segments and breaks in the sandstone? And you see how the tree goes straight through it? That shouldn't have been able to happen if it was built up slowly over time, because the tree would have fallen over. The tree would have died. It just would not have been preserved perfectly like that. Or in this case, you could see one color of stone, then entirely different colors. So how did this happen? Well, a fun fact about trees is that when they get waterlogged, they sink vertically. So instead of going like this, which is what you'll see floating for a while, they eventually tilt all the way like this. And then eventually they get stuck at the bottom. We'll take question.
What is water?
Oh, waterlogged means filled with water. So it's the wood is so saturated with water that it becomes heavy and it sinks. My apologies. No, of course. And so with each wave, you would expect to find sediment layers slowly be building up around that tree, which is what we find with these polystrate trees. All right. Now we can move on to the next part. So the next part of this is soft sedimentary deformation. Now I'm going to try to break things down, but kind of like what Ishmael did, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, please tell me. I'm more than happy to explain it. So I'm going to hop back over here. Okay, so these sections over here are sedimentary rock. And scientists claim that it took millions of years for this to build up. Just give or take a couple million. But scientists claim that these rocks should have hardened and lithified really quickly, which they didn't. So I'm going to explain actually I'll get to that in a minute. So with each layer of sediment, it kind of rapidly built up, and they expect to see that it would take millions of years for each layer to harden into a rock, have more sediment added on top, re-harden, and then it kept going systematically. That's how we get the geological column, which you can see the different layers in the rock. We're not denying that there aren't more layers. What we are saying, though, is that these rocks never had the chance to harden with each new layer of sediment. So if you guys think about it, the layers were still wet, and then when the waves hit, they kind of got these swirl patterns, or they got these wave patterns built into them. Can I go on to the next slide? I want to explain what lithification is, because this is what scientists will say happens with these rocks. So this is the process by which a sedimentary rock becomes a sedimentary rock from sediment. So first comes the depositation. So right there, you'll see that the sediment just kind of is there. That's what happens. It gets dropped off. And then eventually, as more sediment accumulates, they kind of clip together. And then eventually, using water and other things, they harden into sedimentary rock in the cementation part. This, according to scientists, this usually takes anywhere from 100 to 1,000 years, which is why they kind of say that it would have taken millions of years for that much rock to accumulate. But in reality, we don't think that happened. Now, I want to explain this a little bit more because it is a very complex topic. Next slide. I want you guys to close your eyes. I want you to imagine that you're a painter. You're on the likes of Picasso or Van Gogh. You start with your first layer of paint. And then you decide, you know what, I want more layers. So before that layer dries, you add more with the swipes of your paintbrush. You see globs of paint on your canvas. And as you swipe through them, you see swirls left by your paintbrush. On that canvas, you can see the ripples from your paintbrush's bristles. Now you decide to poke that glob, and you see it kind of spread out into your fingerprint. Now open your eyes. That is exactly what happened with our rock. We had a rock that was still wet like the paint as more layers got added on and on and on. And as each wave hit, it shaped it like that paintbrush. It brought the sediment with it, but it also left grooves behind. Okay, next slide. Make sure I'm doing well for time. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about, before we get to this part, a fun fact about the sedimentary rock that happened. So that sediment rock, we had it build up. That was the pate in our situation. It comes from all over the world, just in the Grand Canyon alone. And the Grand Canyon, we find sediment that goes all the way back to Tennessee. The same type of sediment, the same type of rock, somehow got from Tennessee to the Grand Canyon. And scientists can't explain that. But what they really can't explain is how that same sediment came from Tennessee to the Grand Canyon and is also found in New England. Not New England, in England itself. How did that happen? Well, if the wave brought crashing over the water and brought the sediment with it, that would explain it. But modern scientists don't have an explanation for that. They don't have a great flood. It just happened. So now we're going to go into the rapid to no erosion between strata. Now, I'm going to explain what strata is so you guys are on the same page as I am, because I had to do a lot of research to fully understand strata. So strata refers to the different layers in between sedimentary rock. So you'll see that layer versus that layer, or just even in that, you see the ripple effect. Does that make sense? It's what people would refer to as the different layers of the geological column, but like in smaller sections. Okay. When you look at these pictures, what do you guys kind of see?
Just
Hypothetically, shout out an answer.
little bit of bit of fires.
Okay. What do you guys notice about the edges of those layers? Are they defined? Are they not? Yeah. But you see how they're kind of like, they're relatively straight in a sense. Yeah. Okay. Scientists can't explain that. Because if it took millions of years for each layer to arrive, they would expect erosion in different parts of it. Does that kind of make sense? Like, as this rock layer was formed, it took millions of years for the next layer to come on. And while that happened, the rock would just be weathered and worn out by wind or air or rain or snow, depending on where it's at. We don't find that. In fact, what we find are smooth layers. We see clear lines that show definitions of where each new layer of sediment came. And even in this example, you can see the clear lines, but you can see the swirl of soft sediment deformation. Does that make sense to everyone? Wonderful. Go ahead.
So all the sediment or once all soft sediment happened that short this.
No. So it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, but the water lasted for at least 150 days. So all of this destruction and waves and water movement would have had to happen over time. We're not denying that there. Go ahead. That's before the water even started to recede.
So about 200 days.
Or more, yes.
With a lot of sun. 200 days.
Yes, and I can actually get into that too. So it happened a lot with the water coming from all over the world. And if you think of the earth was relatively flat, and I'll explain how it became what it is today. The earth was relatively flat, so it didn't take much for sediment to get brought across, especially with a giant wave of water. So with the water, it would brought the sediment up from the earth, and then as well as from the ocean. And it brought that sediment along with the creatures swept across. Okay, we can go on to the next one. Oh, well, this is just another example of it. Okay, so how many of you guys know how the earth is made up? Like, what are the three main layers? Beautiful. I'm really proud of you guys for knowing that. Okay, so the lithosphere, which is another part of the earth that is described, is the mantle as well as the upper mantle as well as the crust. And it's broken up into tectonic plates. Now, there are two main types of tectonic plates. There are oceanic plates and there are continental plates. Oceanic plates are what we find at the bottom of our ocean. They're heavy and dense. While what we find on the continental plates is that they're lighter, and that's why they float a little bit easier on the water, and they're raised up. And they're significantly less dense. So I'm going to be talking about the theory of runaway subduction, which comes from Dr. I'm going to mess up his name again, but Baumgartner. And he brings up the theory of runaway subduction, which explains why the tectonic plates ended up how they are today, instead of just being like a regular different layer. So you can actually flip slides next, I think. So this is a picture of what runaway subduction is, and I want you guys to keep an idea of this so you understand what I'm talking about. Otherwise, it'll be really confusing. So the heavy oceanic plates began to slide under the continental plate. And because the continental plate is so much lighter, it slid on, like it just would float up higher. And as that happened, the heat from the friction of those plates rubbing against each other lowered the viscosity, which caused it to slide even faster. And as this released, tons of magma came out. And the magma, which is also significantly less dense, floated, raised, and as it cooled, it created an entirely new ocean floor. So this kind of pushed the water levels up, which helped it run over the continents. Also a fun fact, but when that magma released, the heat from that magma would have set wonderful conditions for more rain to come. It would have been the perfect storm of accidental things happening, according to science, for that to happen. And another fun fact about these is if you look at seismic topography, which is basically like looking at the different world, you can flip, it's the different colored maps. It goes by how far down and what color depends on the temperature. If you look at a map of the world, underneath the ocean, it is significantly denser. And in certain areas, it shows the light and coolness of the denser oceanic plates, which are very consistent with the runaway subduction theory. So like as it went under, you find like a warm layer and then you find a cold layer consistent with the subduction. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, I don't want to talk too quickly or not explain a complex idea. Now, you may be wondering, how do we know any of this happened and how does this prove that Christianity is right? What about this specific thing happens and says, oh, well, that's like the Christian idea to the T? Well, if you look at Genesis chapter 7, I believe it's verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the second month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth and the floodgates of heaven were opened. Now, I'm going to take that step by step. It says that the great deep burst forth, almost as if the runaway of subduction caused a breakage on the bottom, which is what we would see scientifically and what we do see from the topography. And then it says that all the floodgates of heaven were opened. And that's the next thing that happened, which would be consistent if the magma changed the temperature for the earth. So with all of that, we have summarized, you can go to the next slide. You have summarized that there are at least 6 different parts of geological evidence that point towards Christianity being the right truth. That would be, let me start, high above sea levels, we find many aquatic and marine fossils in ways that we could never explain. Like in the Himalayas or Everest, the highest places we can get on Earth, we have marine animals. Next, we have the rapid burial. All of these creatures that were quickly buried and quickly killed and quickly submerged. We have what we call the painting method, which was the soft sedimentary deformation of the water hitting it. We have the no erosion or sheet erosion. And sheet erosion is where like a wave would have taken off a top layer of sediment in a clean line, which is why we still see clean lines when we see erosion. And then finally, we have the topography and the runaway subduction. So with that, I conclude my talk. Does anybody have any questions?
You were talking about the plates, like the tectonic and continental. What exactly is a plate? If you could describe it for me.
So the tectonic plates are kind of like, I have to explain it well because I don't want to like mispronounce it because and lead you guys astray. So on the crust, the different levels of where the earth is, it's kind of just like the ground. Tectonic plates would be just like right under the dirt, like the ground underneath it. Does that make sense?
So like those move and like slide under other plates?
Yes, they do. We see it actually happening very slowly nowadays. And it does still happen. So you do still see subduction. Runaway subduction is the same process, just sped up significantly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
So you're, go ahead, you go first.
I heard someone object to this and say that, like, what if the marine animals and all that stuff did die a long time ago and they're buried down there, and because of the movement of the tectonic plates, mountains are formed and stuff like that, and that's why you see like marine life up there, is because they did die, but because of tectonic movement and stuff like that, they
For sure.
give rise to the top of the mountain.
So in that case scenario, I would point out to the fossils that how well the fossils are preserved, because you wouldn't expect to see full fossils in intricate detail where you can study the eye sockets and the nerves in the eye socket all the way up on a mountain if it came from a tectonic plate movement. You also wouldn't still see the clean sheet layers because it would have been disrupted a lot more significantly, if that makes sense. Does that answer your question?
That's good.
So are we to assume that it was one giant continent? That's why all the sediment washed upon the entire earth so easily, and then the earth became extremely violent, mountains raised out of the sea, and everything broke up?
So when it comes to the theory of what one might call Pangea, as modern scientists say, I don't have a specific answer to that, and I wish I did, but I feel like going into that specifically, it kind of took away from what the other stuff that I wanted to present, which was other arguments for it.
I understand. To me, what we were saying is that the sediment washed across the entire earth. So it would seem that the Pangea theory is more provable in that manner.
I mean, I think it would be more provable, but I don't have the necessary information to say that. No, for sure. I just don't want to say that I know something and then be called out later and be like, she didn't know anything.
We're very informed
Thank you.
and great worlds.
Thank you very much. Anybody else have any other questions?
Yeah, I was just gonna add, I think most creationists, at least I think, from what I know, is that they would say, like, yeah, there was, a Pangea, like one big continent before, and pretty much everything you said would be the reason why it all split. So I think that would be.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I was wondering if you know, because like somebody mentioned, it's a well-accepted thing for scientists that there's tectonic plate movement and everything, and they know how mountains were formed, right? So what is the general accepted explanation for that if it's not a flood? Or is it like, oh, it was a different flood from the Bible flood?
So the way that they would say it is that a great flood would cause a rapid acceleration of that process, which is runaway subduction. If the Earth, according to scientists, was around for millions of years, the same process could have happened. It would have just been significantly slower, because we still see that process happening today with tectonic plates move, and it does build up certain parts of the world, but not nearly as quickly and not nearly as significantly as a great flood would have caused.
So the idea would be, yeah, floods are happening and the plates are moving, but it's not a flood that would cause all these fossils and the kind of disruption.
Yes. They're saying it happened over time. It was a slow, gradual process.
Okay.
But I think it's really profound and something to really hang on to, that fossils could not be formed over a long time. Right? Why?
Because they disintegrate.
Yeah, because everything,
Decays.
everything biological about any organism decays, and it doesn't take very long, actually. Even their bones decay. So the only way a fossil can be formed is quickly.
Yeah. And that's another example of the jellyfish, which is super cool because they would have made it long.
Right.
Yes?
Are a lot of fossils created because the actual biological matter decays and then what's around it is like the sedimentary rock?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like the minerals, like what you have as a fossil is pretty much a rock. like minerals replace
So it's like the negative space
kind
around the fossil.
Well, and it also has to do with like what happens, because you can still find fossilized bones, so like the matter changes slightly, if I remember correctly. Alright, well, if that's everybody's questions, oh,
Oh, I have another interesting highlight about fossils. Some fossils still have biological matter attached to them. You know, not just bones, but they can on some fossils they can pull out
DNA.
blood cells, and I just saw something from someone who spoke for Ratio Christi a long time ago. Entire animals have been fossilized whole with all their biological matter still on them. You know, like all their flesh is still on them. And humans, they found humans like this too, buried in bogs. Okay? Yes, with their biological matter, their flesh is still on them.
it'll be mummified.
Yeah, so they're,
and then people
Is
have
those-
eaten mammoth meat from things like that, if I remember correctly, like scientists ate mammoth meat from that.
oh,
Yeah, I remember, I'm pretty sure it was the British people who ate mammoth meat, and they would pay like $500 for a bite of it.
It's an expensive bite.
Not something you get every day, I guess.
Probably tastes like chicken.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me.